I'm Chris Glover, and it's Black History Month. Today, we are honored to be interviewing Donna Harrow. Donna is the Executive Director of the Alexandra Park Community Centre. She's one of the founders of the Africentric School, and she's also the founder of the African Canadian Coalition. So Donna, thank you so much for taking the time to be part of this interview. For the last 20 years, you've been working at Alexandra Park Community Centre. In fact, I've known you for most of those 20 years. But your background actually goes back to 40 years in the community. Can you talk a little bit about your background?
I started working with the Toronto District School Board. I started working at Church Street. However, the principal of Church Street moved to Ryerson and asked that I come over to Ryerson to be there because of some of the issues they were having in terms of Ryerson liaising with the community. That's when I started in that neighborhood 40 years ago. Started out briefly as an educational assistant and then became a liaison between the TDSB schools in the neighborhood. And then I did a lot of work working with young people with issues, and that's kind of where it started off, me working with and for young people in Toronto.
You know, I just realized from this conversation that our paths actually crossed because I was a supply teacher. I had an LTO at Ryerson Public School in 1990. So you were probably there and I was there, but
I was.
Yes, you were helping youth with some issues. What kind of issues were you seeing in the community at the time?
The same kind of issues that we're actually seeing now.
Okay.
The issues with young people who had family issues, emotional issues, even mental health issues, and needed someone that they could trust and talk to, get supports and referrals to different services that they might not know about. Got to know the parents of those children very well and supported them also.
So the time I do remember meeting you is you were the executive director at Alexandra Park Community Centre, and I ran into you because I needed a place to hold press conferences to try to stop cuts to education under Mike Harris. Tell me a little bit about your work at the Alexandra Park Community Centre.
My work at the center is kind of unique in that the center was built and was run before with the leadership of elders in that community. And the Atkinson Co-op is now named after someone who was key in this, who's Sonny Atkinson.
Yep.
I was actually asked to come and be an interim executive director until they found somebody, and 20 years later, I'm there. However, the idea was to respectfully work with the community to be able to provide services that they weren't able to get at the larger community centers.
What kind of programs did you start at the Alexandra Park Community Centre when you became the executive director?
There were programs that were expanded. There always was a youth program, for example, but programs, the use of volunteers, for example, in order to have them more involved in the center and involved in their community, became crucial because there were people who wanted to volunteer and there were people who wanted to learn certain skills. So the catering program, for example, came out of that, where volunteers got together and they made lunches for the seniors in the program. So it was an enrichment of those types of programs.
That catering program is absolutely phenomenal. And let's talk about the Afrocentric School. You're one of the founding members and one of the chief advocates for the Afrocentric School in Toronto. What was the goal of the Afrocentric School?
The idea was to get young people seeing people who looked like them, because they didn't. It's getting better, but it's not where it should be. It's having books and curricula that included people who looked like them. It was giving parents the opportunity to speak freely and on equal terms with the teachers and the principals. And most importantly, it was teaching an Afrocentric approach. This did not mean that other children could not come to the Afrocentric school, because other children benefited from that kind of experiential learning. Angela Wilson, who was my partner in doing all of this, we were not going to be stopped by that extra chatter, because that's not what it was all about. Mm-hmm. Historically, oppressors find ways of dividing people and showing that some people are better than others. It was happening then, and it's still happening now. It's something that we really have to look at as Canadians, because we still have the behavior of our oppressors, and some of us still have the behaviors of the oppressed. And so it's something that we need to look seriously at. That's why some of those things, for example, at the Afrocentric School or within the Alexandra Park community, I will fight vehemently for young people to take positions of leadership and to be taught how to do that well.
You know, I hear what you're saying, and I think decolonizing our minds is ongoing work for all of us, including me with the privilege that I hold. So thank you for pointing that out. Donna, it's a real honor to be interviewing you here today and to make this part of Black History Month. You know, I've learned a lot from this conversation, even though I've known you for a couple of decades now, and it's just really wonderful. So thank you for taking the time.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.